My name is Mark, and I recently moved into an old apartment complex, one of those buildings that has been around for over a century. It has charm, sure, but it also has something else, something in the basement. The first time I heard the whispers, I had just settled in. The pipes in this place were ancient, so I chalked it up to water running through them, old metal shifting with temperature changes. But as the days passed, I realized the sounds weren't random. They were voices, at night. When everything was quiet, I would hear them. Soft, murmuring whispers drifting up through the vents. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were there. I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself it was just the way the pipes carried sound. Maybe someone in another apartment was talking, and the acoustics distorted their voices. Then, one night, I heard my name. Mark, come down. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The voice had been faint, distant, but unmistakable. I threw off the covers and checked the vents, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe it was my imagination. But then, it came again. Mark, we see you. A shiver ran down my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs. The basement was nothing special, just a dusty room with old storage units and the building's boiler system. The pipes crisscrossed the ceiling like veins, stretching deep into the walls. As I stood there, listening, the whispers stopped. Silence, heavy, suffocating. Then, a slow, steady drip. I turned toward the farthest wall, where the old pipes twisted, down into the ground. Water was pooling beneath them, but there was something wrong with it. It wasn't clear, it was dark, thick. I stepped closer and shined my flashlight on it. It wasn't water, it was blood. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat. The pipes groaned, metal twisting as if something inside them was moving. The whispers returned, louder this time. Overlapping voices, hissing secrets I couldn't understand. Then, the pipes started knocking, loud, insistent, like something was trying to get out. I ran. I locked my apartment door, turned up the TV, and convinced myself it wasn't real. Maybe a burst pipe had mixed with rust. Maybe I was just hearing the old building creak. But that night, as I lay in bed, I felt it. The air in my room was damp, heavy with the scent of mildew and rust. I turned my head, and in the dim glow of the streetlight outside, I saw a figure, hunched over, emerging from the vent near the floor. Its skin was slick and gray, its mouth stretched too wide, its eyes hollow and dripping black. And then, in a voice made of 1,000 whispers, it spoke. We live in the pipes. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember how I got out of my apartment. But I left that building that night and never went back. Days later, I saw a moving truck outside. Someone else was moving in. I wanted to warn them, but as I stood across the street, frozen in fear, I heard the pipes, knocking, whispering, calling a new name. My name is Kevin, and I never believed in the supernatural. Ghost stories, monsters, shadows lurking in the dark, it was all nonsense to me. Until the night something crawled out of my basement. I had just moved into a new house, an old rental, with a damp smell and a basement that I swore was colder than the rest of the house. The landlord said it was just poor insulation. I didn't think much of it at first. Then, the noises started at night, when everything was still. I would hear something moving below. A slow, deliberate scraping sound, like nails dragging across concrete. At first, I figured it was just rats or maybe old pipes settling. But one night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. The sound wasn't coming from beneath the floor. It was coming from the walls. I sat up, heart pounding. The noise slithered through the house, moving from one side of my bedroom to the other. I held my breath, listening. Then, for the first time, I heard it breathe. Shallow, raspy, too close. I leaped out of bed and turned on every light in the house. The sound stopped immediately, swallowed by the artificial glow. I forced myself to calm down. It had to be my imagination, stress, lack of sleep. The next day, I went down to the basement to check for any signs of rodents. The stairs creaked beneath my weight, and the air was thick with damp earth. A single, dim light bulb flickered overhead as I looked around. Old boxers, rusted pipes, nothing out of the ordinary. Then I noticed something in the farthest corner of the basement, just beyond the light's reach. There was a hole, not a crack in the foundation, not a forgotten vent. A hole, about the size of a manhole cover, leading into absolute darkness. I hadn't seen it before, and yet, the edges looked worn, used. Something had crawled through. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed my phone and shined the flashlight into the hole, but the beam barely penetrated. The blackness inside was thick, unnatural, as if the light was being swallowed whole. And then, deep within that darkness, something moved. A hand too long, too thin reached forward. Fingers like broken twigs curled against the ground. Another hand followed, then a shoulder, a head, pulling itself free from the void. I couldn't see its face, only the shape of it, unfolding, stretching, its body shifting like liquid shadow. I ran. I flew up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it, shoving a chair beneath the handle for good measure. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then I heard it, the slow, deliberate scraping sound. It wasn't coming from the basement anymore. It was crawling up the stairs. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the front door, leaving everything behind. I never went back. The landlord never called about missed rent. The house still stands, abandoned now, the basement door hanging slightly ajar, and at night, if you get too close, you can still hear it, crawling, waiting. My name is Jake, and I recently bought a fixer-upper house on the outskirts of town. It's old, creaky, and full of quirks, but I was excited to make it my own. The first few weeks were uneventful until I discovered the stairs. They weren't on the blueprint. They weren't supposed to be there. It happened when I was clearing out the basement. I had just finished stacking some old boxes against the far wall, when my foot hit something hollow. Confused, I moved the boxes aside, revealing a trap door I had never noticed before. I pried it open, and beneath it was a staircase. The air that rushed out was thick and stale, like it had been sealed for decades. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness below. I leaned in, shining the light down the steps. The wood was old, splintered, and covered in dust, but the strangest thing was how deep the staircase went. It spiraled down, disappearing into the shadows far below what should have been the foundation of the house. I should have closed the door. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I took the first step, then another. My footsteps echoed strangely, swallowed up by the dark. The deeper I went, the colder it became, and the air grew damp, thick with the scent of earth, and something else, something rotten. After what felt like minutes, my flashlight flickered. I smacked it against my palm, and for a split second, as the light blinked out, I swore I saw something move at the bottom of the stairs. Then, the light returned, and the stairs behind me were gone. I spun around, heart hammering. The steps I had just descended had vanished, replaced by a smooth, unbroken wall of stone. Panic surged through me. I was trapped. I turned back toward the bottom of the stairs. The passage stretched on into the darkness, impossibly long now. And then, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere ahead. I swallowed my fear and aimed the flashlight forward. Hello. My voice was small, swallowed by the void. No answer. The footsteps stopped. Then, a whisper. Low, hoarse, just inches from my ear. You don't belong here. The air turned ice cold. I turned and ran, sprinting toward where the stairs had been, slamming my fists against the stone wall. Let me out, I screamed. The whisper came again, this time right behind me. Go deeper. I refused to turn around. I pounded against the wall with everything I had. And then a hand gripped my wrist, cold. Bony fingers wrapped around my skin, yanking me back. My flashlight slipped from my grip, clattering to the floor. In its dim glow, I saw them figures emerging from the shadows, pale, hollow-eyed, their mouths stretched too wide, their hands reaching for me. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was in my basement, the trapdoor sealed shut beneath me. My hands were bloody from clawing at the wall. I don't know how long I was down there. I moved out the next morning, but at night, I still dream of the stairs, and I still hear the whisper calling me back. My name is Daniel, and I live in a small apartment on the second floor of an old building. It's nothing fancy, but it's home. The rent is cheap, and the neighbors are quieter, at least, most of them are. The tenant below me, though, he's different. At first, I barely noticed him. The door to the basement apartment was always locked, the lights always off. I never saw him come or go, but late at night, I would hear things, scraping sounds, heavy breathing. Sometimes, I could swear I heard whispering, like someone talking to themselves just beneath my feet. I tried to ignore it. Everyone has their quirks, right? But then the smell started. A rancid, rotting odor seeped up through the floorboards. It was faint at first, but within days, it became unbearable. Like meat left out in the sun for too long. I complained to the landlord, but he just shrugged. There's no tenant down there, he said. I laughed, thinking he was joking. But when I saw his face pale, serious, uneasy, I felt a chill creep over me. That night, the noises got worse. Something heavy dragged across the floor beneath me. Slow, deliberate movements. Then, tapping, rhythmic like fingernails against wood. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and then, for the first time, I heard a voice. Let me in. I froze. It had come from the vent near the floor. A rasping whisper, barely audible. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. My fingers trembled as I knelt by the vent, peering inside. The darkness beyond seemed endless, stretching far beyond where it should. Then, something moved. A pale, thin hand shot forward, pressing against the metal grating from the other side. I stumbled backward. A scream caught in my throat. The fingers twitched, pressing harder, bending the vent cover outward. The voice came again, desperate now. Let me in. I ran out of my apartment and pounded on the landlord's door. He answered, groggy and annoyed, but when I told him what I saw, his expression darkened. You need to leave, he said. What? I stammered. You don't understand. There's something I understand. He cut in. That apartment was sealed off years ago. No one has lived there since the last tenant. He stopped himself, shaking his head. It's not safe. Get out while you still can. I didn't sleep that night. The noises continued, scratching, dragging, whispering. But now, they were inside my walls. By morning, I packed a bag and left. I didn't care about my deposit. I didn't care about my belongings. I just needed to get away. As I walked down the street, I glanced back one last time at the building. The basement window was open, and someone was watching me from the darkness within. I turned and never looked back. My name is Eric, and I recently moved into my grandfather's old house. It's a large, creaky thing, sitting at the edge of town, the kind of place kids tell ghost stories about. I never believed in that kind of thing until I discovered the locked door in the basement. I had been in the basement dozens of times as a kid, but I never remembered seeing that door before. It was old, made of thick oak, with a rusted iron handle. It didn't match the rest of the house, as if it had been added long after the place was built. And no matter how hard I pulled, pushed, or rammed against it, The door wouldn't budge. Curiosity got the best of me. I searched the entire house for key drawers, cabinets, even under floorboards. Nothing. Eventually, I gave up and called a locksmith. When the locksmith arrived, he barely glanced at the door before shaking his head. "Sorry, I can't help you." I frowned. "Why not?" He hesitated, looking almost embarrassed. "This door, it shouldn't be here." I laughed. "It's obviously here. Can you open it or not?" The locksmith didn't answer. He turned and left, refusing payment. That's when I started to feel uneasy. That night, I heard something coming from the basement. A slow, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against wood. At first, I convinced myself it was the house settling, an old pipe knocking against the wall, but the tapping continued, and then came the whispering. It was faint, almost impossible to hear, but I knew it was there. Words just beyond my understanding, spoken in a voice that wasn't mine. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I was determined to break the door down. I grabbed a crowbar and went to the basement. The air was thick, heavy, like the whole house was holding its breath. I wedged the crowbar into the frame and pushed with all my strength. The wood groaned, cracked, and then the door opened. Behind it was darkness, not the kind you get in a room without windows. This was something deeper, something unnatural. The walls were lined with stone, rough and uneven, like an ancient tunnel leading underground. A staircase disappeared into the blackness below. A smell hit me, a mix of earth, mold, and something else. Something rotten. I should have closed the door. I should have walked away. But I stepped forward. My phone's flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The air grew colder with each step. The stairs seemed endless, spiraling down and down until I lost all sense of how far I'd gone. Then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There were scratch marks on the stone walls. Deep, desperate grooves, as if someone had tried to claw their way back up. The further I went, the fresher they looked. Then I saw the first skeleton, a pile of bones, crumpled against the wall. The skull was cracked, as if it had been crushed. I turned to run, but the stairs were gone. The way up had vanished, swallowed by the darkness. A breath hot and wet brushed against my ear. "You should have left it locked." Something grabbed my wrist. I screamed, yanking my arm free, running into the darkness, blind and panicked. I don't remember how, but suddenly, I was back in my basement, gasping for air. The door slamming shut behind me. I nailed it shut. I sealed it with concrete. But at night, I still hear it. The tapping, the whispers. And I know that one day, the door will open again.